Hello, people. I finished a book on Leopard Rock, A Life of Adventures by Wilbur Smith. Wilbur Smith is a novelist, apparently a pretty successful novelist, as he is wont to point out in the book. Uh, he writes historical novels, and this book is like half a memoir and half a sales pitch for his books. He goes into his books a little bit and tells about the characters and about the story. And I don't know, I don't just read to pass time. I read so that I can learn something. Maybe you might learn a little bit of things out of books like old Wilbur writes, but from what he explains in here, he dreams up a character. For instance, he'll have a fighter pilot that was horribly injured in a dogfight, and then he becomes a spy, and he goes on some adventures and meets a woman and saves his country. And these are probably in the bookstore right next to the romance novels, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's got Fabio on the cover of some of his books. I did not like this book, in case you can't tell. And he tells about himself, and if I met Wilbur Smith somewhere, if we were stuck somewhere together, we would do nothing but argue. He's, let's see, he is pro trophy hunting. He grew up in Rhodesia, what was then Rhodesia, and so he writes about South Africa a little bit, and he thought the sanctions against South Africa were a bad idea, when the sanctions definitely contributed to pulling down apartheid. He writes that the gold mines in South Africa, that the white people and the black people, worked with each other, singing Kumbaya, and that was not the case at all. This was written in 2018. He has published 42 historical novels, 318 pages, and at first I wrote down it was an autobiography, but not really. Third paragraph, page 172. And I gave this guy the benefit of the doubt more than one way after I read this paragraph. It was 1996, and I was writing the novel that would become Birds of Prey, my return to the world of the Courtneys. Birds of Prey reached further back in time than any Courtney novel before it, back to the middle of the 17th century, when the English and the Dutch were at war for the rich provinces of southern Africa. He may not know what it means when you say the 17th century. The 17th century is the 1600s, not the 1700s. And in the 1600s, the Dutch and the English were definitely at war. But the English knew nothing about South Africa. They were not at war in South Africa. They were at war in the English Channel. The Dutch actually sailed up the Thames and burned a portion of the English fleet. It was a pretty incredible time. The Dutch got to South Africa in the 1600s, yes, but it wasn't until 1795 that the English actually said, we should take that place from the Dutch. And any fighting that took place didn't last longer than 2 weeks. And they actually, oddly enough, ended up letting the Dutch return. And then in 1806, they decided to take it again. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about here. None of that happened. I don't know. He talks about let's see, he's a name dropper. He talks about palling around with Lee Marvin. He works into this book the fact that he owned a Rolls Royce. He works into the book that he has a yacht and that he buys, I guess, like half of an island, and he builds a house there and lives there. He actually, towards the end, compares himself to Arthur Conan Doyle, compares himself to Shakespeare. There is one more thing that I'm going to read. A book like this should be funny. That you should work humor into it, and there's very few spots in there where it's humorous. But I wrote down here Trader's Heart, and it's a great book written about what it is to grow up in South Africa. He never once mentions that book, probably because the author of Trader's Heart sympathizes with the vast population there, which happens to be black and very poor. He also talks about George Orwell a little bit, and this author, this Wilbur Smith, laments the fact that Orwell may be a great writer, but he was left-leaning. I didn't care for that either. But this page 261, this is just a humorous thing. He also writes in here about how he travels all over the world, sport fishing, diving, skiing. This is an incident that he relates here that happens at like Yellowstone or Yosemite, something like that. I don't think this really happened, but it's funny. And any men out there, if they've ever had a girlfriend or a wife with a little yapping dog, this is fun. Back at the parking lot, I heard something shriek behind me. A terrier jumped out of its owner's car and ran around in circles, clearly afraid of something. I looked up in a nearby tree and saw a bald eagle enthroned in the branches, surveying the commotion below. It's as majestic and haughty as any of its kind. The eagle spread its immense wings and dropped out of the tree like a cannonball. It hurtled past my head and snatched up the yapping dog. Silent at last, the dog was up in the air, skewered by enormous talons, and whisked off into the trees and beyond. I know a little bit about American eagles, having spent a lot of time in northern Michigan. They like fish, and American eagles, bald eagles, are carrion eaters. They will try to steal food from another bird, or they'll go to a dead deer at the side of the road. That's what they do. There was a moment's silence in the parking lot. Then the dog's owner stared up to the trees. She rushed off to find the game warden. She returned to the car, racked by tears, her husband comforting her. As she climbed into the driver's seat, he caught my eye. He winked and could hardly suppress a grin. He pumped his fist and let out a whoop, then found his poker face again and slid into the car next to his devastated wife. It seemed the eagle was not the only one who had had enough of that yapping little dog. I don't think that really happened, but it's funny nonetheless. And it would not be unusual for somebody afflicted by the presence of a small dog to maybe fantasize about an eagle, but more likely it would be a hawk. Maybe if it was coming on towards evening, it might be an owl that would pick it up. But eagles, I don't see an eagle doing that. And plus, they're not going to dive into a parking lot full of people. Thanks for watching.